Welcome to NewYorkBIOs Virtual Breakfast Series, a digital platform started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Michael Margolis, Oppenheimer's Senior Managing Director.
From the West Coast. I'm actually hosting a private company conference today in Palo Alto. So I heard all this whole introduction about private markets, IPOs, SPAC. So I got all this material to talk about. So I'm excited.
Awesome.
Good.
Awesome.
Well, tell us how you got to where you are to be hosting a private
tell us about
company
you
conference
first.
in Palo Alto.
Wow. So it's 25 years of background. So I'll summarize it in about 30 seconds. I started life as a scientist. I'm a pharmacist by training. I'm still registered. And I actually practiced pharmacy during the pandemic. So that's a separate story. Started at Lilly back in the mid 90s as a pharmaceutical sales rep. Went to business school, came out the other end, went out actually working on the buy side for a long short hedge fund. My colleagues actually work for Perceptive now, one of the biggest dedicated life science hedge funds. Then I actually went to work for Novartis in Basel in global business development and licensing. Spent almost 5 years at Novartis. And then I actually went to become a banker in 2006. I've been a banker ever since. Started some smaller firms, been at Oppenheimer almost 6 years, built out this group here. And look, I think this is all about relationships. And that's what I learned early on in my career. It's really helping clients, especially in a challenging market. Most of Wall Street has no idea what's going on in this market. I mean, 40% of Wall Street started after the financial crisis. So they really have no, honestly, understanding of a bear market and a challenging market. So here we are, right? 2022.
So why is that? Why is that? I mean, shouldn't the senior people on Wall Street have kind of seen something like this already?
Well, Derek, I said 40%, so there's still 60% around, right? But look, here's the reality. You got a lot of young people come into the sector. They come in every year. And look, banking's not easy, right? It's a stressful job. There's a lot going on in banking. Long hours. I think the word I heard yesterday from a colleague of mine is grit. It requires a lot of grit, a lot of tenacity, and that's not easy.
Well, and also in some respects, to develop grit or tenacity, you have to have gone through adversity. And in a professional capacity, a number of those workers haven't had, I mean, it's just been sort of up from when they entered the job market.
Yes. So listen, candidly, I'll tell you, this is probably the toughest market I've seen in 20 years. It's not all bad, right? But it's a challenging market. And it's challenging for private companies, it's challenging for public companies, it's challenging across the board.
So what makes it different? What makes it harder? What makes it harder than, say, winding back to like 2009, 2010? Like what's different now?
Well, first of all, the sector is much larger now. There's over 900 publicly traded companies. You got thousands of private companies, and you have money out there, right? But I think it's the jitteriness of the marketplace. I think there's no confidence in the Fed right now at all. So every day it's a new adventure, right? Sometimes you get days we got intraday volatility, like last week, 1,300 points, 1,300 point swings, and people get really concerned. So when you have uncertainty, investors get very anxious. And I think that's the biggest difference. Look, I think there's definitely similarities to the financial crisis, but there's actually probably more similarities to the tech bubble. We had a kind of a valuation bubble.
Yeah.
Do you think that, what do you think the typical investor, let's broaden it out a little bit. How do they hodl? Do they hold on for dear life? Do they turtle? I mean, what do they do in a market like this, which, as you're right, has massive amounts of volatility?
You know what's amazing? So the markets are not shut to investors, and there are deals getting done. You're seeing, the private market actually is probably as robust as it was pre-pandemic. It's about $14 billion raised year to date. I mean, it's actually very encouraging. Most people don't appreciate it. Like the private market, it's actually very active. It takes it's longer, it's more challenging, but deals are getting done in the private market. And by the way, if you're public, there's deals getting done too. There's follow-ons getting done, there's pipes getting done, there aren't IPOs getting done. You've had 10 IPOs year to date, and that's the biggest difference, right? So the new issuance market is much more challenging. It's tough to get out. You had certainly Third Harmonic get out. Prime's going to price likely this week. But when you had 101 therapeutic IPOs last year, you've had 10 year to date. That's a huge difference.
So I would also ask you, you'd mentioned just the size of the market, the number of companies that are out there. Is it much harder to tell a story that differentiates you from anything else? I mean,
Yes.
are there just so many companies that either look the same or whatever that, that investors don't know where to go?
Yes. I mean, yes, I want to finish your sentence. Absolutely. And that's the problem. I think in this particular market, you have many companies that are the same. So you have to differentiate yourself. There are a lot of companies that are going after the same target, and that's a function of, honestly, the private markets funding these companies. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but once you're a public company, challenging market, you got to differentiate yourself.
Yeah.
And by the way, you know what differentiates you? Data.
I was just
Clinical
gonna
data.
say, like, yeah,
I'm gonna grab some coffee real quick. Excuse me.
Okay.
no worries.
No, it's interesting because we have, we see the number of companies that go public. You have all of this money in the private markets, and honestly, you tell a good biological story in the private markets, and that you can see competitiveness, team, et cetera. But if the IPO window is open and all of those companies get to go public, you now have all of these companies that are public again chasing the same things now publicly. So it's slightly different if you're betting on a team privately, where you think there may be some differentiation in terms of who gets out and who gets out well. Versus not. But if everybody goes through the window, now you have a bunch of things that look the same to public investors.
That's correct, and I think that's the key. You have to differentiate yourself in these markets. If you don't, honestly, it's very hard to create value. And I think that's the key, right? At the end of the day, we don't need 101 therapeutic IPOs, and we need more than 10 IPOs in a year, right? So there's definitely a happy medium in between, which hopefully, as we get closer to 23 and 24, things will get better.
Yeah.
So do you see the window? I was gonna say, do you see the window opening this year, or a few things cracking and a few things trickling through that just have to do that in order to achieve their next milestones?
Jennifer, if I had a crystal ball, obviously I'd be doing something different. But I think we're getting closer to year end. I mean, will be a couple more IPOs get out, perhaps, but they're going to look and feel more like Third Harmonic and Prime than what we saw in the last window or last year. I think only thing that time really helps is kind of the maturity of the sector. If you remember when the IPO window opened up in 2012, I think it was, there were a couple of IPOs like Intercept and others. These were very mature companies. So those are the first companies to get out. And by the way, at the tail end of a window, what do you get? You get immature, early stage companies.
Yeah. So let me ask you, I want to wind back a little bit to your, your company experience, right? To think about kind of M&A and think about the way that large biopharma looks at this market, right? Because there's a ton of cash sitting on the balance sheets of larger biopharma. Yeah. Everyone looks to M&A as a catalyst for the sector. But, do you see that as something that is, do you see that as something that's kind of around the corner? Because you have so many companies that went out that are either preclinical or platform plays, et cetera. Do you see larger companies looking at that as a play for value, especially at the valuations that we have now? Is that something that's really going to kickstart the sector again, or do you think they're going to kind of sit and wait?
Let me kind of give you kind of level the playing field here a little bit. Because having worked in BD&L and Novartis, and certainly been following the M&A market for a long time. First of all, big pharma does not buy things because it's cheap, right? We saw that back in the last financial crisis. If that was the case, they would have bought every company in the biotech space. And they're not going to save the whole biotech sector. That's not their MO. But what's going on in big pharma and big biotech is there's a huge patent cliff out there. About $130-ish billion of revenue going off a cliff by the end of the decade. And that's significant, right? So what does big pharma need? They need late stage. They need revenue. A lot of the preclinical stuff, that's not going to solve their patent cliff issue.
Yeah.
So you've seen some M&A out there already. And I think their propensity is to buy later stage opportunities versus early stage. Yeah. I will tell you, in the backdrop, you also have a government problem with the FTC, right? They publicly have said, or maybe not so publicly said, they don't like big mergers. So the FTC has been a real issue. And you've seen this on small mergers. I have colleagues who are part of M&A, and these deals did not close for a while because of the FTC challenges. So whatever happened with Merck Seagen, I'm not going to speculate here, but clearly didn't happen, right? There's a lot of pent-up demand over the summer for that transaction. Yeah. And I'm not going to also comment if it made sense or it didn't make sense, but clearly I don't think you're going to see a lot of big M&A. I think you're still going to see tuck-in opportunities. And there are a number of late stage stories out there that probably make sense to be acquired by big pharma to help solve their patent cliff issue. But I think we've seen actually a healthy amount of M&A. I mean, I know people want to see more, they want to see bigger, but I'm not sure we're going to see that.
Right. So that was actually a chess match question, right? So we have all of these companies that went public that are not late stage companies. They're all early stage. M&A is not going to save them, right? So you're a company that has a year worth of runway. And let's imagine that you don't have, pivotal clinical data in your 12-month horizon. What are you doing right now?
Look, I won't lie to you, it's a challenge. I mean, there's probably access to capital, but it may not be the same capital you're used to. Being very kind of candid about it.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the issue with the last set of IPOs, it was the same set of investors that took you public, right? And they publicly said, or not so publicly said, listen, you got to figure things out. We're not going to fund you.
It's been a good trip so far, everybody. We wish you luck.
Well, look, let's not lie. That's kind of been a bit of the message here. But I think, look, consolidation certainly isn't, and that's part of the M&A picture. Big pharma, big biotech may not save you, but you think about kind of companies out there. Does 1 + 1 equal more than 2? That's an option. And I will tell you that that's a big part of what I spend my time on these days is kind of consolidation. Think about strategically what makes sense, and kind of can you put two companies together, cut the burn a bit, and then raise money. Because by the way, there's money out there. One thing the buy side loves to do is kind of sign a CDA, take a look under the hood, and finance these stories, right? And get some kind of edge. And I think you're gonna see more of that going forward.
And if you're an executive in one of those companies that you think might be prime for consolidation, what is the best type of tie-up to look for? Is it really a match in therapeutic area, but they're at a different stage in development? Is it something that would be complementary? Like, how would you advise somebody who's realizes they have to look at other options?
All the above, right? I mean, look, I think to merge two of the same thing, I'm not sure it really solves anything. There's got to be some differentiation. There's got to be something on the platform that actually makes sense. There's got to be something technology-wise that actually can be additive or synergistic to what you're currently doing. So I think, again, putting two companies that are the same thing together, I don't think that solves that. I think you're just creating more of a burn, perhaps.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about investment banking writ large, right? Because what you're talking about now is, someone somewhere has to be the creative arbiter of what to do here. Where does the money come from? How does the story get told, or how does the story get sold? So if we think about this, kind of coming up to 30,000 feet, how has the role of investment banking changed over the last 20 years within the biotech industry? Because it seems to me that you kind of have to have a lot more tools in your toolbox to be in iBanking these days.
I think you're right. And look, I think I'll never claim I'm the smartest banker out there, but certainly I now have the years of experience. So 20 plus years of experience in the industry, having a pharmaceutical background, almost 17 years as a banker. That experience, you just have seen like this. I really truly say that junior bankers, this is an apprenticeship. You're going to see things and there's pattern recognition. So there are experiences that I had 15 years ago that seem to be the same as today. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
but it does. So I think really, look, being a trusted advisor in this market is truly important. Really talking to your clients and giving them good, honest advice, I think for the most part really makes a difference. Over the pandemic, I don't think that really existed. It was playing whack-a-mole, right? Like, how many deals can we do, right? That's what it was. And by the way, if you didn't do a lot of deals in the in the market during the pandemic, you probably weren't a very good banker. Let's just be very candid, right? We did lots of deals, right? I'm not sure how much strategic advice we're giving. And I think people didn't really think about kind of the downside of the marketplace. Everything went up. Everything was strong. Access to capital was so good. It's now, obviously, it's changed. And I can tell you, my team is really focused on relationships. We really focused on giving advice, holding hands, and really kind of getting people through this. I mean, I don't want to call it the valley of death. That's a pretty negative word. But at the end of the day, we're really holding the hands of our clients and supporting them and giving them good, honest advice. Like at this point in my life, and I'm pretty honest with my clients and telling them like, what is the situation? What are you going to do? I think, there's some bankers out there, and I saw this early on in my career. It's the old bait and switch. Tell your clients what they want to hear, and then obviously do a transaction. You get a totally different experience. That is not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Then life is too short. I think my job is to really help my clients, get to the other side. And there's some companies that have to do a really challenging financing to get to the other side. But if you can raise that much money to get to the other side and actually turn over that data card and it's successful, that's a differentiator. You do that deal.
I think the other thing that it's really easy in hindsight to look back and say, oh, company X, Y, or Z shouldn't be public. But, kind of the steadfast rule of management in a small company is if you have the opportunity to raise money, raise it. Right. And it's always a binary decision, right? You never get to go turn the card back over and say, well, what if we did stay private? Right. If the window, the rule is almost, if the window is open and you can go be public, because the window is not going to necessarily be open forever.
I've never had a client tell me, oh my God, I wish I didn't take that last $10 million.
Yeah.
There's way too much dilution there. That $10 million, that was the kiss of death. No, everyone wants, when you can raise money, you raise money.
Yeah.
But look, I understand the cost of capital in this market is not cheap. It's expensive for the most part, but capital at the end of the day for these small cap, micro cap companies, that is your lifeline.
Yep. People talk about companies either quote unquote raised too much money or anything like that. It's a nice problem to have in some ways that, okay, we put 300 million in the bank in an A round, right? Now we have to actually do something with it. And it makes your return profile more challenging. But again,
yes,
no one is feeling sorry for you to have a war chest of, $300 million in the bank to actually execute on. So, there might be some companies that spend it less than efficiently, but in most of the time you'd rather have it than not, because, ideally you'd rather have $300 million to put things into the clinic than not.
No, I couldn't agree more with you. I think that's so important. I think there's certainly companies out there they wish they took more money. I mean, I have clients who raised an inordinate amount of capital during the pandemic, and probably wish they raised another 100 or 200 million dollars.
Yeah. What are you seeing? I was gonna say, so like as you work with clients, no names, anonymous clients, what are the different types of financings that companies are accessing now, as opposed to maybe what they would have done 18 months ago?
Look, I think in general, and this shouldn't be a primary source of capital, but for all the public companies that, in the background here or listening in, if you're a public company and you're shelf eligible, have an ATM. Like there's like no ifs, ands, or buts. And it shouldn't be your primary source of capital, but it should be certainly one of the arrows in the quiver that you have. That's really important because some of these companies, they'll trade lots of liquidity, lots of volume on any given day, and the ability to actually utilize the ATM. The cost of capital is efficient. It's cheaper than the regular way financing. It's fast. It's easy. And by the way, if you're not using it to just kind of raise money, putting a bid out there, there's opportunity to do block transactions. So I think it's an important tool that every company should have when they're filing their shelf. We are seeing, I would say, more and more pipes in the marketplace, especially for not just micro cap and small cap companies, even for large mid cap companies that are utilizing pipes, because public market exposure is not great. So the ability to actually bring in investors on a confidential basis and raise capital, whether they're getting confidential data or non-confidential data, that is something I think is very much in vogue right now. You are seeing some CMPOs, confidentially marketed public offerings out there. I think for smaller companies, you're seeing registered directs, common stock and warrants.
Yeah.
Look, I think some companies are doing, I would say, more structured transactions, which I don't really recommend. But again, if companies need to raise capital, they raise capital, right? They do what they have to do. I think those are the. I'm sorry, Eric.
I was going to say we have a question on if a private company has the opportunity to do a SPAC in the current market, would you do it, or are they completely toxic at this point?
Look, I don't think anything's completely toxic, right? So listen, in full disclosure, we have our own SPAC. And we've been out there, and we have an independent board, and we have an independent CEO. I think the problem is, SPACs before the last couple of years were a bad 4-letter word. And now they've become, unfortunately, a bad four-letter word, to most people. I think the problem is anything that gets overused and misused, they become the word toxic. There's certainly people they're more inclined to stay away from this product. But by the way, reverse mergers are very much in vogue for private companies. I think, and I say when I started off in banking 17 years ago, reverse mergers were a bad word, or bad words. People didn't want to do them. Then all of a sudden you have success. I think if anything, look, I think with a SPAC, they got misused, they got overused. The wrong people got into the sponsorship group, where I'd say the alignment of value wasn't there, right? But if you actually can find the right structure and the right people around the SPAC, it makes sense. It can make sense.
Yeah.
No, I remember we had a couple of folks on talking about SPACs throughout, intermittently throughout the kind of the go-go period, if you will. And the funny thing is when we would ask, like, is this something that's going to sunset at any point? In the beginning of that, they're like, no way, this is here to stay. This is an absolutely valid form of thing. And then towards the end of it, they're like, yeah, it might be about done. Yep. Yep. No, it might be going away.
I think at the end of the day, value has to be aligned for both the sponsor and for the potential target. And I think that's the key here. And I think it's certainly it's an option to go public, but I think it's got misused like everything else.
So go ahead, Jennifer, you got one?
I was gonna say, do you think that when the IPO markets open back up, that we'll see a huge rush, or will companies be slower to access the public markets sort of after they've lived through this sort of downturn in access?
It's a great question. My gut tells me it'll be slower. Like I said before, we've had 10 therapeutic IPOs year to date. There were 101 last year approximately. So clearly both are extremes. So I think you won't have 100. I don't think we'll ever see 101 therapeutic IPOs in a given year, but 20, 30, that to me seems a lot more reasonable.
Yeah.
So slightly off kilter question. So if we think about differentiation, right, is there any form of, new commercial differentiation that becomes attractive to either mid-sized companies that sits kind of outside of the purview of larger pharma or larger biotech? So for a little clarity, if you look at where cell therapies are now, it's questionable whether they ever get to be big enough to be kind of pipeline leading things for larger biopharma companies. Do you see any sort of other kind of almost a new specialty pharma type company arising because we need different commercial models for new and different kinds of therapies?
I mean, look, clearly the commercial model, the CMC model is very different for cell therapy, right? And I think even if you're a big pharma, I can tell you, I worked at Novartis for almost 5 years, and you watch what they had done with cell therapy. It's really contrary to what they've done from a manufacturing standpoint and a manufacturing standpoint. But I will tell you, if you ask the marketing folks at Novartis from a for commercial standpoint, these have not been big successes, right? Financially.
Exactly.
They're not really kind of moving the top line revenue. So I think it really depends, right? Derek, I think it really depends on how big the market opportunity is. No one will actually question whether CAR T was important to cell therapy, but is it going to move the needle in terms of revenue for an organization like a Novartis or even a mid-cap biotech company? Probably not.
I mean, that's we're in some sort of middle of this wave, right? When you had Kite and Juno come out, the initial clinical results were spectacular. You have things that can be curative, and you have this wave of optimism. And then, as everything happens in cancer, right? The next step is solid tumors, because it always is. But if that kind of promise isn't realized, the kind of broader evaluations around cell, and I'll put gene therapies in there too, but around more specialized therapies as they actually mature into the market, you kind of get a little bit of a better picture of where they might fit, because you're no longer, it's no longer a hype cycle, right? It's no longer dreaming. You now actually have some commercial proof of where they can actually sit. So
I think that's kind of the pause in these sectors, right? So investors, especially during the pandemic, love to buy the sizzle. They don't want to buy the steak, right? The sizzle is more exciting than the actual steak. And now people take a pause. They realize kind of what are these markets? How big are these markets? How do I make money in these markets? What's the value proposition? And I think that's kind of like that's the pause right now. People are trying to figure things out. Like, I'm a huge fan of cell therapy. I'm a huge fan of gene therapy, but I think the sector itself has to define what they want to be. And every company's not going to be successful, and there's going to be winners and losers in this sector.
Yeah.
And I think the dust is still settling in general.
And how do they figure out how those particular potentially curative therapies fit not only within their financial portfolio, but also in their patient, right? Within their remit to treat and cure patients, right? So I think there's a balance there.
Correct. Look, what is the price you're going to pay for a curative? If you're a gene therapy and you have one therapy, right? Just really kind of one dose, that's it. What do you pay for that? And what is the system willing to pay for that? And
that's the big question, right? Especially
the big
now.
question, right? Yeah. Really big questions. Well above my pay grade. But look, these companies, I think, and pricing is going to be interesting, right? And has been an interesting topic in these areas.
Do you think we ever get to the point where we're genuinely paying for value? Right now, anytime somebody we have a very big split between what is the price of a therapy and what is the value that the therapy brings, right? And everyone loves to use Gilead and Hep C as a poster child, but if you actually think about what that did, you should buy that therapy twice a day and twice on Sunday.
Well,
right?
Sovaldi was $90,000 for basically a curative treatment. That's pretty, in relative terms, that's pretty cheap, right?
Yeah.
But how much pushback do they get for that?
Well, they've been pilloried. They're the every time pricing is brought up, Gilead is brought up because the pill cost $1,000 and the pill doesn't cost $1,000 to make. But ultimately, when you think about where we need to go as an industry, we've now come out with gene therapy for things like SMA and all sorts of other things that were untouchable before, and now we're kind of curing kids stuff and giving them a life that they would have never had before, right? So
in general, when you talk about pricing in kids, probably that's an area that people don't touch, right? Because pediatric pricing, it is what it is. It's very hard to kind of get much pushback, but if you kind of expand to adults, that's where you start getting a lot of people questioning like the value. Look, I can tell you, having been in the industry for a long time, my first job was at Lilly. I remember I joined the Lilly PAC, political action committee early on in my days, because at the end of the day, look, big pharma has really hurt themselves. I'll put it out there. They never came together. They never worked together to kind of really help the public understand their value they bring to society. For a very short period of time, people actually appreciate big pharma and big biotech during the pandemic. Like the goodwill that we created, with the vaccines, with the therapeutics, for whatever that was a very short-lived value they created, it all went away.
Yeah. My those who've joined our webinar and more than once have heard me say they have a bumper sticker, we have a white paper. And it's hard for us to explain how pricing works without a lot of footnotes, and so it makes it harder, I think, for the public to understand.
Look, at the end of the day, and I don't want this to turn into a kind of pricing discussion, but you look at the overall healthcare GDP, pharmaceuticals are about 11% today of the healthcare GDP. The services side, the hospital side, is a much larger percentage. And no one points their fingers at hospitals and PBMs and the payers, right? It's all about the big bad drug industry. Well, listen, God bless the hospitals and the payers, right? They've done a great job deflecting their business model. But the pharma industry, right, really hasn't gotten together and defended themselves or help people explain to people what it costs to develop a drug. Mind you, a cell therapy or a gene therapy.
Yeah, and having lobbied for GSK and Merck for years, I can tell you also another factor that has hindered sort of the congressional uptake of understanding is the fact that there are hospitals in every congressional district.
Yes.
And there are not pharmaceutical companies.
And by the way, Jennifer, what's important is not only there's hospitals in every congressional district, they're the biggest provider of jobs.
Yep.
So at the end of the day, which Congress person is actually going to say, "Oh, you're bad"? No, you're basically providing jobs to my constituents.
Yeah.
Right. The other challenge too is that it's very easy to create this big bubble called the biopharma industry and talk about a drug, right? And there's a very big difference between, you know, a cardiology drug that you're going to try and sell to hundreds of thousands or millions of people, and, you know, a gene therapy that's going to sell to maybe 1,000 kids at once. You know, we have a very challenging environment to explain, well, it's yes, but, right? It's like, well, sure, there's this, but also there's this case over here and there's this case over here. And, you know, it's a much more complicated story because, you know, we're a diverse industry that serves every single patient type under the sun and does it in about the riskiest fashion possible from a capital perspective. So, you know, everywhere you look, it's a challenging, everywhere you look, it's a challenging story to try and tell from a legislative standpoint.
Correct. I agree. These are challenging business models to develop. And I think it's an evolving situation, Derek.
Yeah. All right. So where do we go from here? What is if we think about where this market is now, let's look at our crystal ball. So what do we look like in 2 years? If you're a private company that just raised a $30 million A round now, right? What are the things that you're thinking about in terms of how to watch this market develop? And do you see kind of healthy Series B, Series C private market opening up to kind of bridge that gap in between where these companies are now and hopefully where they'll be public in a few years?
So if I'm a Series A company, by the way, the numbers don't lie, right? The Series A and Series B market is actually pretty active right now. So you're able to raise capital, you know, hopefully with a healthy mix of insiders or existing investors and new investors. You know, I'm hopeful that in, you know, back half of next year into 24, we see a more active IPO market. I think what it takes to get public in this next cycle will be different than what we saw in the last cycle. Yeah. Meaning, I think having clinical data, you know, getting real proof of concept is going to be important in differentiating to get public. Yeah. Whereas before it was like, oh, you're 2 years from the clinic, fantastic. Here you go.
Here's a pile of money.
And that will be very different, I believe. I think you look at the performance here and the valuations. Look, obviously valuations are coming down, and that's just a function. You know, you look at your public comps; they've come down. But I think more importantly, what it takes to be a public company. Why would you want to be public when you're preclinical? Kind of to play out a science experiment in the public markets, it's tough, right? I mean, if you're even being a phase 1 company, I'll tell you, if you're a big pharma, right? You can run multiple phase 1 trials and you don't have to disclose anything. Phase 1 is meant for PK/PD, right? Maybe you show some, you know, hints of efficacy or activity. I mean, now the bar for phase 1 cancer trials is what's the durability of your effect? What do you mean durability of effect? That's for later stage trials. No. You're a public company, oncology story. We need to see durability of effect. It's tough.
And so is it going to be even more important that early stage companies, as part of that maturing process and data, right, achieving data milestones, that they also look for partners within pharma to help sort of
so it's funny you mentioned that, Jennifer. So when I think about what pharma brings, right, and look, I think early on in my career, and especially when I worked on the buy side, the investors would say, just go do a partnership, right? Get a big upfront, right? That validates you. Well, that also dilutes your value too, right? That's strategic dilution, which is frankly worse than a bad financing, right? So I think what big pharma or biotech does, it provides validation. And I think validation can be used in lieu of clinical data. It could be part of building up the value that a company wants to attract other investors. So I'm a big fan of working with pharma, working with biotech, doing a collaboration, getting FTE support, maybe getting an equity investment, because for pharma, writing a check off their balance sheet has always been easier than any kind of hit on the P&L. Yep. So equity investments could make sense. And again, not capping your upside. You know, all of a sudden you do back in the day, you did a big deal, you capped your upside. So as a public company, where are you, right? Like how do you create value? Yeah. And you're really in a hole.
Unless, you know, to flip it though, unless you're a platform company where, you know, it's baked into the model where
correct.
Be able to execute on these partnerships.
Correct. So if you're that's a very good point there. So if you're a platform company, yes, there's different ways you got to think about from a portfolio management standpoint. what do you want to value, and what do you want to kind of lead with, and what do you want to partner?
All right, here's another one for you, and I'm smiling because I kind of know where this one is going to go. So, a company calls you up now and says, hey, we're an AI company, and what are the things that you ask them to figure out whether they're valuable or whether they're ready or not?
It's a great question. Fortunately, my colleague spends more time in AI than I do. So I wish I
like
wish I
the
had a
fortunately
lifeline.
part of that answer, right?
No, but it's look, I think at the end of the day, it's all about what does that AI platform provide the company, right? Is it means for drug discovery? Is it means to kind of make drug development more efficient? And that's where I kind of look. There's been some very successful AI-driven platforms, but in my opinion, from a therapeutic standpoint, it somehow helps drive drug development or drug discovery, right?
Yeah.
And I still want to see what's the output of that AI platform. That's important to me.
I think we're probably getting to the point where we have a bunch of these AI companies in the markets, and now we're going to be able to judge them on, okay, what have you put in the clinic, and what do the results look like?
Correct.
It's fine to kind of give the rosy picture of the value, and I actually believe in it in a lot of ways, but the proof is always going to come down to safety and efficacy in clinical trials, and I'm
Right.
really interested to see which ones of those companies actually prove out that hypothesis and to actually see some results come through in the clinic.
And Derek, that is a real litmus test, right? Because what goes into the clinic and what comes, and what that's successfully developed in the clinic.
Yeah,
that funnel.
Yeah. We actually have a question from the audience, and it's basically saying between differentiation and value, which you touched on earlier. Here, must it be intellectual property, since it can't be location or factory equipment in biotech? He says, like the slogan, quote, "No bucks, no Buck Rogers." Should it be no IP, no IPO? So should finance and C-suite pay more attention to IP strategy aspects of their own business strategy?
My personal experience, what I learned in big pharma, it's all about IP, right? That's the first thing you look at, right? And that's how big pharma thinks, and I think they still think, how do you have an edge here? So I think, and I ask companies this question on a regular basis: what is your IP strategy, especially I would say for crowded spaces going after the same target? What is your IP strategy, right? What is your edge? And then I think that's an important feature. So I do, and I'm not sure. I mean, I guess the buy side still focuses on IP. I don't want to say they don't do that, but I think it's fundamental to a successful company, not only in the short term, but really the long term success, especially of a platform.
And don't you think it's even more important now as Congress prepares to put even further limits, right, on IP capitalization through payment in federal programs?
IP is critical. It really is, hands down.
So when you're working with your company, so you're out on the West Coast, you have a private company event today. What are some of the ways that you're trying to position your companies or kind of help them tell the story, right? When you dig in, what do you look at and what do you think about?
It's a great question. So first of all, my team, and I really trust my team. I'm very proud of the team that's with me and I've really worked with for a long time. We have a lot of experience in helping our clients. Done a lot of transactions, hundreds of transactions over different types of markets. I think we're uniquely positioned as a middle market firm because we're not too small. We have a lot of resources. We're not too big. We could be nimble. And for us, it's about building relationships and really supporting our clients. So when I sit down with private companies, we had a cocktail party last night where I spent a lot of time with companies and really kind of understood where they're at. Look, I met with a company that just raised, a really decent sized Series C. It's led by a real biotech and venture capital investor, and that's meaningful, right? These companies are putting money. These investors are putting money to work, right? They're getting it done, right? But again, they're looking for differentiated stories, and that's the key here. And it's not all oncology, by the way. We spent a lot of time on oncology in this discussion, or gene and cell therapy. There are other areas of biotech and therapeutics that are really developing. Let's talk about metabolic diseases. I mean, for all of a sudden, metabolic diseases are actually back in vogue. Look at diabetes and obesity, right? Between Novo and Lilly, and then all the companies around that. I mean, this is a huge area that's actually developing. And that's exciting.
We have Elon Musk tweeting about his.
Oh God, we don't have enough time for that.
He
We
should
do
stop.
not have enough time for that
He should
today.
just stop.
He's a retained Novo Nordisk spokesperson now.
Oh,
I mean, I
God.
would say for me, you know, I've been doing this long enough. The half-life of most bankers is not 17 years. I truly love what I do. I really do. And one reason why I love what I do, I like variety. I like, you know, every day I wake up and it's a different problem to solve, different experience. You have the macro markets of the market behind you trading, and you have all your clients and all their company in the companies, and they have their ton of challenges every day and their successes, right? You wake up one morning, company put out a press release of positive clinical data. I have to react. Like, what are we gonna do for you now? How are we gonna support you? How do we position that in the best possible way?
And how you obviously work with companies all across the country. What have you seen specifically? Obviously we're New York Bio, right? As the development of sort of life sciences in the New York metro area.
So I'm a Jersey guy, first of all. So I'll tell you. So to me, the pharma industry.
Sorry, guys, we're having some problems.
Breaking up.
No, but this is the opportunity, right? So it's just kind of a plug for New York, right? And I asked this question of a buddy of mine who works in commercial real estate. So clearly there's a major commercial real estate issue, and you have a lot of intellectual capital and people in this area, right? So Philadelphia, by the way, right, just to kind of give them a plug, they did a great job building a cell and gene therapy business.
Yeah, they did.
Right. And you have people in New Jersey kind of or maybe lived in Bucks County, and they attracted those people. And then you have people in New Jersey who could easily come to New York, right, and work there. You have all this capacity for space. I know it's very hard to retrofit commercial real estate for labs, but there's an opportunity here. And I wonder over the coming years, as we kind of solve this commercial real estate issue, does that really help the New York bio situation? There's no reason why you can't build a successful business here, whether it's New York City or New York State or New Jersey, right? You're kind of in that whole tri-state area.
Yeah.
Because by Jersey, from a pharma standpoint, I was going to say, they hurt themselves, right? Everything moved away. My father spent 47 years at Roche, right? That campus in Nutley, right, basically was abandoned for years. Then Seton Hall Medical School came in, and all of a sudden I understand a Japanese pharma company, I think it's Eastside, is coming to that campus, right? That's awesome, right? You're 15 miles from New York City? That's great.
Yeah.
That's great for New York bio.
Yep. No, I think I think from a real estate perspective, I really tip my hat to the city. They've done a great job. They just had another announcement with CUNY that's putting something literally kind of next to the Alexandria Center. So they're making kind of Kips Bay into more of a cluster down there. And we have stuff in Harlem. We have stuff in Long Island City. It's all accessible. And real estate guys have actually done a really good job of really kind of putting buildings up. And, it's slightly, if you build it, they will come, but they're all filling up. We have good space available, and it's a lot better than it was 5-10 years ago.
I mean, I think it's great to hear, and I haven't heard. And actually, as a follow up here, I'd personally like to hear more and assist where I can. I think that's a solution for this commercial real estate puzzle, right? That people are trying to solve for.
Yeah.
Because clearly, I don't think people are ever coming back to the office 5 days a week, and you got a lot of empty space that could be utilized in the right way.
Yeah. So, Michael, thank you so much. This was great. We really appreciate your joining us this week. No,
I'm sorry for all the technical issues here. I really enjoyed this. And if there are any follow-up questions from the audience, feel free to reach out to me. I think Jennifer or Derek, you can provide my email address, and I'm happy to respond accordingly.
Great. Thank you so much, and good luck on the West Coast this week.
Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Everybody, take care.
Bye now.